Well, I'm really excited to be here. When they asked me to do this back in, I think it was March or April of last year, and they were like, teach something about the ocean. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? So I mulled over it for a long time, and finally just one day I was sitting in my house, and I'm like, whale evolution. I want to know about whale evolution because honestly, even though I've studied marine biology, it's not something that I dug that deep into. So I was like, I'm going to learn something in this process and then get to teach it to you. So this is the last 3 months of me reading articles and, digging into Wikipedia and different things, looking at evolutionary documents, looking at creation documents, looking at bones, looking at this and that. And so it's been a really fun process for me. So hopefully you'll get some joy out of it as well. The one thing I do want to warn you, I am fighting that really nasty cold that's gone through the whole globe here, and I've been over it for a while, but the cough just is still lingering, so hopefully it will stay away tonight as we talk here, but occasionally it might come out. So, you guys ready? I'm pumped. All right, here we go. So the first thing we're going to do today, just because I want you to have an understanding of what we're talking about, because I know you've all probably seen a whale or a dolphin, I want to give you just a quick background on what whales, dolphins, and what we call cetaceans. That's the big group we're going to be talking about, are cetaceans. That's the scientific name for the group of whales and dolphins and porpoises. So I just want to give you a little background as to what it is we're talking about. So the order Cetacea is a group of mammals, and this is for all the kids in the room. Do you know what it means to be a mammal? What's one thing?
You drink milk from your mother, and you usually have hair, but not always.
Okay, so there's two of them. You have hair, usually, and the big one is you drink milk from your mother. You have mammary glands, which is where the name mammal comes from. Any other kids know something else that mammals have? Anybody? Adults can, children at heart too count here, so anybody? They're warm-blooded. All right, and to be a little more specific, they're what you call a homeotherm. All right, a homeotherm means that they keep a constant body temperature. Because there are birds. Birds are warm-blooded as well, but they are just endotherms. They store their heat, they stay warm, but it fluctuates a little bit. Mammals, like whales, it's homeotherm. They're consistently the same body temperature. Which, how many of you have ever swam in the ocean or a cold lake before? Is it easy to keep it a constant body temperature when you're swimming in a cold lake? It is not. So there are some challenges that are involved with being a whale. But anyway, it includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and they are mammals just like your dog or your cat. So they look a little bit different. Forelimbs. Who knows what a forelimb is? Anybody? Everybody wave a forelimb at me. Perfect. This is your forelimb, all right? On a whale or a dolphin or a porpoise, the forelimbs are modified into flippers. There's a picture of a humpback whale's flipper waving. It's beautiful. I like the rainbow there. I think it just adds a nice touch. But so that is your forelimb, all right? That's the forelimb. Now, an interesting thing about this, and this is one of the things that an evolutionist will look at, is if you look at the bones of the forelimb there, you're going to see the same things that you see in your arm. You're going to see a radius. You're going to see an ulna. You're going to see a humerus. You're going to see carpals and metacarpals and phalanges. You're going to see the same bones. They're just flattened out, fused together to form a nice flipper structure, all right? They're fin-like tail, so they have a tail, it's fin-like, and it's called a fluke. Looks like this. That's from a gray whale. Now the fluke, anybody know what a fluke's used for? What do they use it for?
It's used for pushing the dolphin, and the porpoise forward.
Perfect. It's for pushing them forward. All right. Now, in order to have one of those, you have to have some special vertebrae. You have to have these things called ball vertebrae that actually move up and down with a lot of muscles attached to them. That's something that you only find in whales. You don't find it really in anything else. So in order to have a fluke, you need to have that. That's going to become important later on. And then their nostrils. This is one of the most interesting things. Their nostrils are located on the top of their head in either a single or a double blowhole. Sometimes they have one, sometimes they have two. And here's a picture of a double blowhole of a large bowhead whale. So if you look at it, it looks very much like a nose, but just on the back of the head. Just to give you an idea of, we're very human-centric the way we think about a head. The whale's brain is actually behind that. So when you look right up here, if you see the nose, the brain is actually closer to where I am standing. It's just we, as people, think the brain should be right in the forehead. It's not. It's actually behind the blowhole. Their nose just has moved up to here, and their mouth just sticks out a lot farther. All right, so it just kind of throws us off a little bit when we look at them, but that's a really important piece to know about whales. The other thing about cetaceans, when you look at classification, there are two groups of cetaceans that most scientists kind of agree with. All right, we take the big group of whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and we clump it into two groups. The first group we call the toothed whales, or the RodoCetus. And again, cete, you'll see that word cete quite a few times tonight. Cete just means cetacean, means whale. All right, does anybody know what odonto means? It means teeth. So an odontocete means toothed whale. These would be your orcas, for example, which, by the way, I don't have another time to tell you this. Orcas happen to be the largest dolphin, just so you know. They fit into the group Delphinidae, which are the dolphins. They're just really big. And the name killer whale came from the fact that they actually kill whales. A pod of orcas will go and they'll eat a humpback whale, or they'll eat a bowhead whale. So they are whale killers, and someone just switched it around and called them killer whales. So they are orcas, but they are the largest dolphin. The other group are the baleen whales, or the mysticetes. All right, now a baleen whale is a little bit different. Everybody look at your fingernails right now. Imagine that you had fuzzy fingernails sticking down out of the roof of your mouth, and that is the only thing you had to eat with. That is a baleen whale. You can see it right there on the upper jaw. When you look on the inside, you have these long plates called baleen. And if you look, all that fuzzy stuff, that's on the backside. That's for capturing small food particles, plankton, krill, that type of thing. On the front side, which you can't really see in this picture, it just is a solid bar coming down. So it'd be like a thick fingernail in the front with fuzz in the back. And what they do is they take their mouth, they fill it very full of water and small food. They spit the water out, the food gets stuck, and they take their enormous tongue and lick it off, and that's how they eat. So the large whales are the baleen whales. In fact, the largest animal on this planet, the blue whale, can be over 100 feet long and is a baleen whale. They eat some of the smallest things in the ocean. All right, easy way to tell the difference. Well, the first one is teeth. All right, if they have teeth, it's a toothed whale. If they don't, it's a baleen whale. The other thing is you look at the blowholes. Toothed whales have a single blowhole. Mysticetes, or baleen whales, actually have two blowholes. So that's an easy way to tell the difference whenever you see them swimming around. Because usually they're not going to jump up out of the water and smile at you. So you have to kind of, often all you'll see is the blowhole. So that'll give you a chance to tell what it is. And here's a picture of some humpbacks coming up and taking those huge mouthfuls of water to get some food. So that's just a quick breakdown of what whales are, because in order for us to talk about whale evolution, we need to understand what a whale actually is. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump into what I'm calling the story here, all right? Really interesting, a couple years, boy, it's a long, I would say a couple, but it was a long time ago. 7, 8 years ago, Ken Ham came and talked at Wooddale, I think, church down in Eden Prairie. And one of the things he said has stuck with me since then. He said, evolution, when they talk to you, evolutionists, they do a very good job of speaking with a unified front. When I started digging into whale evolution, it was a very unified front. I mean, if you look at PBS, or you look at Smithsonian, or you look at these things that they say, whale evolution, they all have the same pictures, the same kind of flow, and it was very unified. But when I started to dig a little bit more, I realized that there's really not much unification at all. There are people that believe one thing and someone believes something else and someone believes something completely different, and it's constantly in a change and flux. So as we go through this today, what I did is I took kind of the consistencies of all the different variations and tried to kind of portray that as my main flow today, just because we could spend 3 days talking about all the variations of this. So this is kind of the consistencies that I saw as we went through it. So looking at that picture up there, I want you to look at the very top right of the picture. What do you notice? You see a hippopotamus. The most current unified front in the evolutionary realm is that cetaceans and the evolutionary tree of cetaceans are most closely related to a hippopotamus. Now, does anybody know anything about hippopotamus besides that they live in the water? They're dangerous, yes, but they actually have hooves. They are hooved animals that like to live near water. They're vegetarians, but they're really aggressive and huge, right? Well, that's what whales are supposedly most related to. And this is kind of a newer idea over the last probably 10 years or so. But we're going to go through it and kind of talk about why and how and that type of thing. So here's the main point of the evolutionary story of whale evolution, is that 50 million years ago, this whole process started. All right, so if you think evolutionary theory, where did mammals evolve? They evolved on Earth, on land. So at some point, in order to get back into the ocean, they had to go from land and evolve back into the ocean. And this happened about 50 million years ago, is where this would have started, all right? Now, really quick, I have a couple little video clips. This guy right here is Dr., and I'm going to try to say it properly, he's German, and he's got 4 first names and then his last name. And I'm going to try to pronounce it German, all right? But it's K Bison, all right? So this is Dr. K Bison, and he's one of the 2 most well-known whale evolutionists in the world. All right, him and another doctor named Dr. Gingrich, who we will bring up later. So these are like the 2 top-notch, like, if you want to know anything about whale evolution, you go talk to one of these 2 guys. So this is him kind of giving his synopsis of why this is a good thing, the whale evolution. So let's make sure this is, oh boy. Oh, there it goes.
In the early 80s, scientists knew that whales were derived from land mammals and there must be transitional forms, except none of those were known in the fossil record, which was really sad. As time progressed then in the 90s and the early years of this century, more and more intermediate forms were discovered that really fill in all the intermediates that we were hoping for. And right now, whales is one of the best examples of macroevolution documented by fossils.
All right, so what did he just say? This is the #1 thing evolutionary pointing to for transitional species. This is like the best of the best. All right? So what I'm going to do over the next 15 or 20 minutes is explain their best of the best and why I feel that it's not the best of the best. All right, so that's kind of where we're going from here. So really quickly, what we have are some phylogenetic trees up there. This is kind of thoughts of how and where whales fit evolutionarily speaking. All right. The one on the left that you can see, this is T. Bison right there. That was the guy that we just heard. What he feels is that cetaceans are a close relative of Artiodactyla, which are the hoofed animals, but they're their own separate entity, and they actually are more closely related to this extinct group that we call the Massanicea, which you can see down here at the bottom, which are land mammals with 4 legs. All right, so that's kind of where his thinking is, and that was more of the traditional thinking of evolutionary thought, is that whales were direct descendants of this group that we call the Massanicea. All right, that's kind of where we lie. Well, more current data, they look at molecular data, they look at DNA, they look at kind of different body parts, is that a lot of scientists are now saying that that's Artiodactyla, that hoofed animal group, that whales are actually a part of that. And if you look, you can kind of see them right there in the middle, most closely related to the living hippopotamus. And you can see that there are 2 extinct groups there, and the most closely related one to the cetaceans, again, would be the Massanicea group. All right, so there's some varying thought on where we should put cetaceans with regards to evolutionary history, but the one there on the right is kind of where most people are falling now. In fact, if you go to Wikipedia, which I discovered that Wikipedia, if you ever want to know anything about evolution, Wikipedia is very, very good at filling in all the blanks that you need to know. So that's the one that they kind of point to, is the one there on the right. So most of what we are about to talk about originally fit into this Massanicea group. And we're going to go through the story right now. One of the main evidences that you'll hear me talk about are ear bones. Paleontologists, when they find a skull, one of the first things they do is they look at the ear bones, because ears can tell you a lot about an animal. Well, the ear bone that you see up there is of a whale. All right, this is called the auditory bulla. All right, and inside the auditory bulla, we have one that's kind of fused to the back of our skull. All right, it contains the middle and inner ear, and most organisms have one of these. When you look at a whale's, and I don't have a laser pointer, but I can kind of point out, do you see the appendage that sticks off to the side in the middle on the 2 pictures on the top that kind of come off to the sides? Those are called the sigmoid process. All right, now most of the time sigmoid processes are kind of a plate shape, But in whales and dolphins, current whales and dolphins, they stick out like that. They almost look like a finger sticking out of the ear bone. So when scientists look at bones of deceased, fossilized animals, one of the things they look at is they try to find that sigmoid process to try to determine, is it more water-based, is it more land-based? So when we talk about ears today, that's what we're looking at, all right, is that sigmoid process in particular. So that's going to be an important piece for us. So here's, excuse me, the story from land to water. We're going to go quickly through this. Here we go. First one is the Pakicetus. All right, do you guys remember what I said cetus meant? It means whale. All right, cetus means whale. So Paki means Pakistan because that's where they found it. So this is the Pakistani whale. All right, are you ready to see what the Pakistani whale looks like from 50 million years ago? That's the Pakistani whale. All right. This is a wolf-sized creature that was land-based. But one of the things that scientists discovered when they found the skull of this, and we'll talk in great detail about this in just a minute, is the ear looked similar to that of a whale. So they said, it's got to be a whale. We're going to call this the Pakicetus. We found it in Pakistan. It's got a whale ear. It's a whale, all right? The next one in the group is the Amblyscetus natans, all right? And Amblyscetus natans means whale or walking whale that swims. Okay, so a walking whale that swims from 49 million years ago, and it looked like this guy right here. All right, this is very, size-wise, it's like a really large male sea lion. It's about the size of this guy. Yeah?
It looks kind of like an otter with a shrew's nose.
It does. It's kind of got an interesting look to it, doesn't it? But that would be the second step in this evolutionary chain, would be the Amblyscetus. And then we come to RodoCetus. Now, cetus again means whale. Rhodo is just the rock formation that they found them in. So they named it after where they found it. So it's a RodoCetus, which is from 45 million years ago, and it looked, two species have been identified. And what they did is they took the two species that they had a partial skeleton of one, they had a partial skeleton of the other one, and they clumped them together to make a more solid skeleton. And this is what it looked like right here. All right, so this one again, sea lion size, does still have an external ear. You'll notice that the nose has moved up on the head just a little bit. All right, so its nose points upward, which means it was a water-based animal, which it was. After this, we come to the Dorodon. Dorodon means spear tooth. All right, these from 41 to 35 million years ago, thought to have branched off from Bacillosaurus, which we'll talk to in just a minute, and it's the closest relative to the modern whale, and it looks like this guy right here. So what you'll notice is they have extremely small little rear legs that stick off the side, little appendages. You'll notice they do have a fluke in the back, and they do have flippers, right? And then again, it's hard to tell in that picture, but the nose is about halfway up. It's just barely in front of the eyes, would be where the nose of that guy is, the Dorodon. And then finally, we have the Bacillosaurus, which means king lizard, which at first when they found it, they thought it was a dinosaur, so they called it a saurus. And then later on, they tested it even more and figured out that it was actually a mammal and that it was a full whale. All right, it had fully aquatic with flukes, flippers, and it looked like this guy right here. Again, the nose is about halfway up. It's just in front of the eyes there, and you can see it's very much built for the ocean. All right, so that's kind of the evolutionary timeline that when you read up on whale evolution, that's what you're going to see. Making sense so far? All right, so that's the story. That's kind of where we're at. That's the unified front I was talking about. You can see exactly what it is. It looks beautiful. It kind of has a nice flow to it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk through and look at the actual bones and try to figure out, all right, what do these bones really show us? So we're going to take them, excuse me, we're going to take them one at a time. All right, we're going to start with Pakicetus. Anybody remember what Pakicetus meant? Pakistani whale, all right, with 4 legs and it looked like a dog, right? But anyway, it's a Pakistani whale. Now, one of the original images that was drawn of the Pakistani whale, or Pakicetus, looked like that guy right there. Looks a lot more aquatic, doesn't it? Now, here is, remember I said there's 2 big scientists when you look at whale evolution? This is the other guy, Gingrich. I mean, big time into whale evolution. He's one of the top-notch men. If you want to know anything about whales and old whales, you would talk to him. In 1983, he discovered this set of fossils, and what he said is that there were subtle clues in combination, the arrangement of cups on the molar teeth, the folding of the bone in the middle ear. Remember the ear thing I told you? That's one of the things he was looking at. And the positioning of the ear bones within the skull, he noticed were absent in other land mammals, but is a signature of later Eocene whales. So prehistoric whales is what he is talking about. So he said, you know, I see these things. So here's what he came up with. In fact, if you look at the picture right there, if you look at the skull, you see the shaded in part of the skull? That's all he originally found. One of my favorite things when I read through this stuff and look at pictures is to find what they actually have versus what they show a picture of. Because I'll tell you, I have a great imagination, but sometimes the imaginations of these artists is even greater than I've seen. So, but all they found is just that shaded gray part, and from that shaded gray part, Dr. Gingrich came up with this whole story about how Pakicetus was this water animal, how it was adapted to swimming and fishing and doing all these things, and he drew that picture right there. And in fact, that picture showed up in, I believe it was Nature magazine when he first published this. Well, later on, and in fact, you know, what we know now, because we found more, and I'll show you that in just a second, is that they actually were just land animals. In fact, Gingrich even came back and said, but we do know that the hearing mechanism that was that of a land mammal, and that it was found in fluvial sediments with other land animals. So even though the ear bone looked whale-like, it was found with land animals in sediment that was land, yet he called it Pakicetus. All right. Later on, what they discovered was more bones. You can see the top right there. That's the actual skeleton that they have now, which was the one that was laying in front of Dr. K Bison when we saw his little video. That was the Pakicetus skeleton. And from that, they've been able to determine that Pakicetus actually was just a land animal. Walked around just like you and I do, you know, on land, and the ear is just a little misshapen. In fact, interestingly enough, this doctor right here, and this is a really hard quote for some people, just because the words are really big, so I'm going to try to break it down for us. But Dr. Liu is a very well-renowned mammal expert. And he studied Pakicetus, did some more research on it, and what he said in 1998 was that other diagnostic characters, such as the sigmoid process, as discussed below, are now open to question in the wake of new fossil evidence. Basically, what he's saying is what we thought was the sigmoid process of a whale, we're not so sure about that anymore. And then he comes and says that the sigmoid process is a simple plate and is equivocal. Equivocal basically means open to more than one interpretation. All right, so he's saying that this ear bone that we thought was whale-like really isn't whale-like, it's more plate-like, and it could be interpreted lots of different ways. And basically he's saying it's not a dead ringer for whale evolution anymore. We can't put our hope on this ear bone and say Pakicetus was a whale because it's not, is basically what he was saying. And he published this in a journal. All right. Remember how I said when you start digging, that unified front starts to go away? Well, this is some of that as I dug. All right. What we're going to look at next is RodoCetus. Give me 1 second here. In fact, I just have one more quote that I forgot from Dr. T. Bison again about Pakicetus. In 2001, he made a statement. He said, Pakicetids were terrestrial mammals, no more amphibious than a tapir, which basically swim in the water occasionally, and that's it. So the story changes just a little bit. So now what we're going to look at is RodoCetus. All right, so discovered in 1993 in Pakistan, and again, only a partial skeleton was found of Pakicetus. The ear bone, though, was again very similar to a whale along with some of the teeth. So that they looked at that sigmoid process and they thought, you know what, that looks very whale-like. So they called it a walking whale, RodoCetus. And then they realized, well, maybe it swam too, so they throw the word nadens in after it, so it's a walking whale that swims. All right. And here's a picture of the reconstructed skeleton. So the picture on the top is the reconstructed skeleton that Dr. Gingrich reconstructed from what he found. The picture below is the bones that he actually did find. And you can see there's a lot of stuff missing. Anybody notice the most important part of trying to figure out if the animal swims or walks that it's missing? It's missing the spine and the pelvis. Two huge things that are important in trying to determine what an animal does. So the other thing is, you see the things in red right there? He actually found those 5 meters above everything else. evolutionarily speaking, 5 meters, 15 feet, is a huge difference in time, supposed time, yet he pulled them down and put them in there because they fit. All right, so and this is what he made his initial discovery based on. And then they recreated it and made a model that looked a lot like that. Things I want you to notice first is that they gave it webbed feet. And can we really see much of that? No, I mean, you can see what they did with the legs. And where do you notice the nose is? Can everybody kind of see it?
It's more like, it's like covered in hair, like just partially up the nose.
It's partially up the nose. What are they trying to prove here? Where's a whale's nose? It's way back here, right? Well, if we can get it moving, that means this is a good link, right? So this is what they discovered, but I want you to notice what was missing from the original skeleton. Where the nose would have been, it was completely gone. All right? So this is the model that you'll see in museums still to this day. All right? In fact, more remains were found in 2002, and that's what we have now. So they found more. They found a lot more of the back. You can see some of the pelvic girdle. You can see a little bit of that back leg. Poorly preserved, though, so it was really hard to determine if it was land-based, if it was more water-based. It's really hard to determine. And what's still missing, though? Where the nose is. All right? Where the nose is. So I have a little video to show you here again. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can get it to work first try here. There we go. Again, this is Dr. T. Bison talking about Amblicitus, because he's one of the people that discovered Amblicitus. Oh, sorry. Go back. There we go. So that was what they actually have. This is the reconstruction that hangs in quite a few museums across the country and across the world, actually.
I was surprised that the skull wasn't more complete. I thought you had this full, because I've always seen the models in the museums of the full skull. How did you figure out what the shape of the skull? Was it based on these bones, or did you have other fossils to go from?
So the shape of the skull is based on the fossils that we have, and so we have the parts that have the eye and the brain case and the back of the snout. We don't have the tip of the snout, which is unfortunate because we don't know where the nasal opening was, therefore. However, we did find the whole lower jaw, so we do know how long that snout was. We don't have a sense for its exact shape. So that's based on related animals. Those related animals all have the nasal opening way in the front, so those related animals would be Pakicetus and Pakicetus. Those have their nasal opening way in the front, so it's likely that Amblicitus had that too, but we don't know that.
All right, so what did he just explain? He said, well, we really think the nose was in the front, but what does the image show? That we have a partially evolved blowhole. So it's very deceptive as to what they actually have and what they portray to us. So it can be very confusing to those of us that go to a museum and see this cool skeleton because, I mean, in all honesty, how many of you think skeletons are cool? You saw the thing, you're like, wow, that is awesome. So I think when I see it, but it can be really kind of can throw you off a little bit based on what they actually have. Excuse me. Stephen Jay Gould, who was a very well-known evolutionary paleontologist, I believe at Harvard, said this, and most of it doesn't fit with what we're talking about, but it'll make sense in just a minute. He said, at a higher level of evolutionary transition between basic morphological designs, gradualism has always been in trouble. This was a paper he wrote on punctuated equilibrium, which is fast changes in evolution instead of slow, gradual ones. He said, though it remains the official position of most Western evolutionists, smooth intermediates, and this is kind of where we're getting at with this, smooth intermediates between Bauplane, which is basically body plans in German, are almost impossible to construct. Even in thought experiments. So even if you sat and thought about what would a transitional species look like between these two things, it's really hard to come up with an idea of what it looks like. And then he says there is certainly no evidence for them in the fossil record. And then this is the part where I kind of am pointing to. He said curious mosaics like Archaeopteryx do not count. Now, a mosaic is an organism that's found that has parts from different organisms and different groups that don't look like they should fit together, but they're there in this organism, and they call them mosaics. Well, it just so happens that Pakicetus and Amblicitus are mosaics. They have all of these traits of land animals, and then an ear bone that looks maybe a tiny bit whale-like, but not really. So they're a mosaic. So if Gould even says, we can't use these as transitional species because they just don't fit. So I find that kind of interesting, yet we're still using these things to kind of fit them in. And another famous Russian scientist, which I cannot pronounce his name. I tried all day to figure out how to say that name, so I'm not going to try to butcher it today. But he's an expert on whales, and he actually disagrees with the description of Pakicetus and Amblicitus natans and similar quadrupeds. There are others that fit into this group, remember, I just picked a few of them, as possible ancestors of whales. He thinks they're a completely isolated group, that they have no relation to whales whatsoever. So again, as we dig deeper into evolutionary thought here, there's not a unified front. We have a lot of contradictions and a lot of people saying a lot of different things. All right. Now we're, excuse me, we're going to look at RodoCetus now. All right, so this was the next one. The original image created of RodoCetus included a fluke and flipper. So this is what it looked like right here. All right, looks very whale-like, doesn't it? You can see the front flippers, you can see the fluke in the back. Looks very much like a whale. The crazy thing is they made this initial image, which has now changed, I'll show you the one later, based on just a few fossils. And this is, Dr. Gingrich is the one who did a lot of work on this. So I'm going to show you this quick little video clip. You can see there we have Pakicetus, we have Amblicitus natans, Dorodon, which we'll get to in a minute, but right in the middle there you can see RodoCetus. So we're gonna hear what the doctor has to say about the skeleton of RodoCetus and what it looks like.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of RodoCetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of RodoCetus had a whale.
Okay, I'm going to pause it right there for a second. Can you see the underlay of the bones that they actually found in the picture right there? So the bones that they found, there are no forelimbs, there are no rear fins, there's no back beyond the pelvic girdle at all, and they found partial parts of the skull. Right? That is what they found, and then they created what you see there in that picture. I just wanted to point that out as we moved into the rest of this video here.
Fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of RodoCetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on RodoCetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on RodoCetus based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in RodoCetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on RodoCetus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of RodoCetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that RodoCetus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies.
All right, so more bones have been discovered since the original picture. A couple things they found. They found that really it was a land animal, all right, more land-like. It had a tail that was more land-like. Its front legs were not flipper-like. And there's a picture of its pelvis. Here's a reconstruction to the best of their abilities with the bones that they do have of what they think it now actually looked like. You can see that it did have pretty large back feet, and the front feet were pretty short, but also long and extended. So it was a land or a water-based animal. You did see that its nose was more up, moved up on its nose quite a bit, so its nostrils could breathe easily in the water. And it was very much like a seal or a sea lion. It could walk on land just like a sea lion could, and also swim in the water. All right, so this is very much like a seal, really not much like a whale at all, once you get into what the bones actually look like. And then lastly, we're going to quickly talk about Bacillosaurus and Durodon. All right. Both of these were fully aquatic mammals. All right, these were considered prehistoric whales. The Bacillosaurus was 60 feet long, which is huge. It's very, very long. And the Durodon was actually only around 16 to 20 feet long. So huge size difference in these two animals. And when you look at pictures of them, here's the evolution of whales. You can see a human, you can see Pakicetus, you can see Cetus, skip one, because I remember I didn't talk about all of them. You can see RodoCetus, and then after RodoCetus, you can see right here in the middle, you can see the Durodon, which is kind of that yellow-orange color with the stripes on it. And then you can see the really long one after that is the Bacillosaurus. All right, so those are the images of what they would have looked like compared to a large male orca that you can see in the last step there. A couple things about these. Bacillosaurus had a really long spine. In fact, its vertebrae were extended much longer than most whales. And when scientists look at, and I read this on Wikipedia and a couple other spots, but when they look at those bones, it looks more like they would have moved in a side-to-side motion, and that they would have actually slithered through the water more like an eel than like a whale, just by looking at its backbone. So that would be the Bacillosaurus. And the Durodon, on the other hand, its spine was more like a whale. The vertebrae were much shorter, and it was theorized to have kicked and moved just like a whale would have. All right. Now, when you look at the phylogeny of it, if you've never read one of these before, basically the bottom point down here would be old time. That's the beginning of the timeline. And if you follow it up towards Bacillosauridae up there, that would be the most recent. All right, that's kind of how the evolutionary history goes. And each one of these little branches would be a speciation event where a group of organisms split. One started to evolve into one thing, the other one continued on in its evolutionary path. And you can see where they all fit. We've talked about Pakicetus. We've talked about Cetus. We skipped the third one. RodoCetus is like the RodoCetus that we talked about. It fits in that group. And then the last one is the point I wanted to show you. You can see Bacillosauridae is continuing on. And then you see where it says the Durodontidae. See how they split there? Where do modern whales come off of? The Mysticetes and Odontocetes? They come off of the Durodontidae. Is what the theory now stands at because of the way the backbones worked, is kind of where they put it. All right, that's how you read that chart there. So are any of these things a direct ancestor? No. They would say the only direct ancestor of modern whales would be the Durodons. All right, but the rest of these were in that evolutionary line that led to whales, is kind of how you would read that. But a couple things about this. All right, these are evolutionary scientists that I'm reading quotes from. All right, these are not creationists. These are evolutionists. Dr. Lawrence Barnes says Bacillosaurus existed at a time when baleen-bearing mysticetes are known to existed, and echolocating odontocetes are presumed to exist. Dr. Barbara Stahl says the serpentine body and peculiar shape of the cheek teeth make it plain that these archaeocetes, which means ancient whales, could not possibly have been the ancestors to modern whales. These are two evolutionary scientists. Remember how I said when you start digging, that unified front starts to kind of fall apart? Well, this is what we see when we start digging into it. And to throw a big wrench into all of this, all right, in 2011, Some scientists from Brazil and France were down digging in Antarctica, and they came across a fossil jawbone of a Bacillosauridae that was dated in rock that was 49 million years old. Now, if you haven't been paying attention to our numbers here, what that means is that that fossil predates every single fossil that I just showed you, except for Pakicetus. So basically, what that means is that we went from Pakicetus, which was a wolf, to a full whale in 1 million years, using evolutionary time. Now, how many of you have seen a picture of a wolf? Or seen one? How many of you now have seen a whale? Do you think 1 million years is really enough time to go from a wolf to a full-fledged whale swimming in the water? No, it's not. Even if you give, like, statistically the best chances of mutations and punctuated equilibrium, and you throw all those amazing things that evolutionists talk about into it, there's just not enough time. So, is it possible to go from our lovely Pakicetus here to these more prehistoric-looking whales? There's a toothed whale. You can see the one on the bottom is an odonocete. The one above is a prehistoric mysticete, or baleen whale. Do we have enough time? If we go by the original timeline, of 8 to 10 million years enough, and with this new jawbone discovery, we actually dropped that down to about 1 million years. Is it possible? Well, if you're Dr. T. Bison, you are in agreement that yes, it is. In fact, he has a book, if you want to read it. It's called The Walking Whales, From Land to Water in 8 Million Years. You can buy it on Amazon. I think it was $23, all right? It's long. It was 300 pages plus. Just pictures, descriptions of everything they've discovered, all right? PBS, excuse me, PBS says none of these animals is necessarily a direct ancestors of whales that we know today. Remember the last little line I showed you with all the branches coming off of it? So this is kind of what they're describing. They may be side branches of the family tree, but the important thing is that each fossil whale shares new whale-like features with the whales we know today. And in the fossil record, we can observe the gradual accumulation of these aquatic adaptations in the lineage that led to modern whales. So PBS thinks that, yeah, we can get there. All right? Well, I'm here to tell you that I don't think it's possible, because here are a few of those things that you would have to change between a Pakicetus and a whale if you want to give them the 8 to 10 million years or the 1 million year. Either way, it's really not going to happen. But here are some of those changes that have to take place. So here's a little bit about whales. All right? So if you like whales, you're going to learn a little bit more about them right now. First one, you need to have ball vertebrae. Ball vertebrae are in your back, and what they do is they allow your tail to move up and down instead of side to side. Because if you think about a whale's movement, their whole body moves up and down, and that's how their back works to get power into their fluke. And think of the muscle structure that they would need in order for that fluke to push water with the size that they are. So not only would they have to develop ball vertebrae, but the muscle structure that goes with it in order to swim through the water. And that's where this comes in. They would need that musculature of the tail fluke, which is crazy. I mean, when you look at a whale vertebrae, they have these massive extendons that come off of them that muscles attach to, so they can just get that drive and push. Because if you're a 20-ton whale pushing through water, you need a lot of push. All right, so you need to develop those. You need blubber. Remember, we talked about they're mammals. They need to keep a constant temperature, and some of them live in really, really cold water. Well, in order to do that, you're going to need blubber for insulation. So that would be something that would have to evolve, because Pakicetus didn't have that. Another crazy thing is they can drink seawater. What would happen if we drank seawater? We would die. It wouldn't take very long. You would dehydrate and die, all right? But whales have an amazing ability to drink seawater, because their kidneys can not only process the salt and get rid of it, but they can do a bunch of other stuff with it that would normally kill us. So you would have to evolve the ability to do that, all right? The fetus, interesting. On land, what do you want to come out first? You want the head. Why do you want the head to come out first? So you can breathe air, because if the pregnancy takes a while, it takes a while to get the baby out, at least they can breathe. Well, in the case of a water-dwelling mammal, what do you need to do? What do you want to come out first? You want the tail to come out first, because you want the head to be last. Because if the head comes out first and it takes a while, the baby could drown. So we had to develop a complete breech position in our whales so that the babies would not die during birth. All right, so we'd have to evolve that. You would have to modify the mammary glands in order to nurse underwater. So these babies come up and they hit their mom and it squirts milk at them, all right? Because they can't really suck, so it's like nudge, squirt, and they have to be ready to capture it in their mouth and drink it. And there's a whole modification that takes place in order to do that. You would have to take, remember how I said early on that the forelimbs have all the same bones in them? You would have to take a functional walking arm and flatten all the bones out, thicken them up, and make it so that there was muscles that go over it so that it could do this instead of bend and do all the things that a land animal has to do. All right, so you'd have to do that in that time period. You would have to reduce the hind limbs and pretty much get rid of them. Now, one thing I do want to tell all of you, how many of you have ever heard that a whale pelvis is vestigial, that it doesn't have a purpose anymore? That's one of the things that evolutionists will say. Guess what? It has a really important purpose. And we have kids in the room, so it helps with the baby process. All right? If we didn't have the pelvis there, there'd be no whale babies. The males and the females need it in order to successfully make babies. So it's something that's extremely important that we need. So we would have to do that. And that's where that loss of pelvis and sacral vertebrae comes in. You would have to have novel muscle systems for the blowhole. On land animals, do we have to think about breathing? No. How many of you honestly sit and think, okay, take a breath, exhale, inhale, exhale? No, we don't think about it. But if you're a whale or a dolphin, guess what? You have to think to breathe. You don't think about holding your breath. So it's a complete reworking of your respiratory system. Whales can choose to either take a breath or not. So there's a complete reversal that takes place in that. You have to modify the teeth. There's a whole bunch that goes into modifications of teeth. You have to modify your eye for underwater vision. How many of you have ever been in a swimming pool and opened your eyes? Do you see well? No. The cool thing is that whales, they see perfectly underwater, and they can pull their heads up out of the water, and they can see perfectly on the air as well. So their eye not only sees on air, but underwater, which is an amazing modification that would have to take place. They would have to reorganize the skull bone and musculature of the skull because, I mean, first of all, the blowhole's moving up. The way things work and move there is quite different. They'd have to modify the ear bone so they can actually hear underwater. And just so you know, whales don't have external ears at all. It's all internal, and it's connected to their lower jaw. So when they make and hear sounds, the sounds travel through their chin, their jawbone, back to their inner ear and gets processed. And if you're an echolocating whale, which is the toothed whales, you're sending out thousands of signals every second. They're bouncing off the world around you. They're coming back, and instantaneously they're going into your jaw, to your inner ear, to your brain, and you're processing a 3D image of everything that's out in front of you without ever using your eyes. In fact, an echolocating whale, if you were pregnant and you jumped into the water, they could echolocate your stomach and see your baby. They could do an ultrasound on you underwater. And know full 3D image. They could tell you if you're having a boy or a girl. They can see all. Does this happen quickly? Those are amazing adaptations that take place. So we would have to do that. And here's the most amazing one. How many of you have, I'm sorry, I can't stand this movie. I apologize for those of you that like it, because there's so much wrong with it. But how many of you have ever seen Finding Nemo? Okay? In my marine biology class, our final exam is we watch Finding Nemo, and they have to write down 50 biologically incorrect things in the movie. And you can do it in the first 20 minutes. I mean, it's not hard. But anyway, so Nemo and Dory, they're hanging on. This is for the kids, too, if you've never seen this movie. So they're hanging on for dear life. They don't want to go down into the whale's throat because the whale's saying, let go, and Dory's saying, let go, and Ryland's like, when do you know to let go? And they're having this big moral dilemma. It's like the climax of the movie. And finally, he lets go. And next thing you know, they squirt out of the blowhole. Not possible. It just so happens that in this evolutionary process of going from a land animal to a whale in that 1 million or 8 to 10 million years, what would have had to have happened is you had to completely decouple the trachea and the esophagus. The breathing system of a whale is completely and utterly separate from that of your eating. What they swallow goes down their esophagus to their stomach. When they breathe, it's a completely separate tube that goes to their lungs. They never, ever come in contact with each other. That's not something that easily comes. I'm sorry, I can't think of a mutational way where there would be an advantage to having a half-modified like trachea esophageal thing that didn't quite work right. It's not going to work. I mean, the modifications that have to take place there are just unbelievable. But that was something else that would have to happen. They would have to be able to synthesize and metabolize isovaleric acid, which kills terrestrial mammals. They produce that when they dive deep. If you had any of this, you'd be dead like that. It's quick, all right? They can take high levels of it because their body has a mechanism and metabolism to process it that no other animals have for diving deep. And again, that blowhole musculature and the neurological control of it, echolocation, which I kind of explained to you, and then behavioral changes. Whales happen to be extremely social animals. They live in pods and groups. They have their own languages. If you take an orca whale from Australia and an orca whale from Alaska and you put them together, they won't know how to communicate with each other because they have different languages. They have different social structures. And this is one of the problems that a lot of scientists have with places like SeaWorld, because they've thrown all of these animals into this small container together and they're from completely different cultures because they have social groups. They teach each other things. The moms teach the babies how to do stuff. And there's a pod of orcas in the Pacific that actually kill great white sharks. No other pod anywhere in the world has been seen killing great white sharks except this one, because one of them figured out how to do it, they told all their buddies, and now they can all do it. That's a pretty complex system that we would need to evolve. So in 8 to 10 million years, or 1 if you go with this last jawbone that was found, could you do all of those things reasonably, even if mutations happened, just like every generation? I don't think you can get there. I just don't think you can get there. So really quickly in my last few minutes, where did they actually come from then? Where did they actually come from then? I'm going to go to my favorite place in the world, to the Bible. We're going to go to Genesis 1. Genesis 1, 20 to 23 says, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures. In fact, in some versions of the Bible, it even says the great whales. And every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning on the 5th day. Now, if we were to continue on, what happens in day 6? We make the land animals. So could whales have evolved from land animals? In my mind, no, because God created the swarming creatures of the ocean on the 5th day, and land animals on the 6th day. Completely separate entities in time. There was no need for evolution to take place because God created whales to live in an aquatic system. He gave them the musculature, the social cues, everything they needed to survive in that realm, and then he gave land mammals everything they needed to survive on land. Pakicetus and Cetus, they were on land. That's what God made them to be. Whales, they were created for the ocean. Really quickly, for those of you that really like, a little bit more of the creation piece, how many people have ever heard of Barrowman's? Barrowmanology, looking at created kinds. Well, I read a great article. They've done a lot of research and statistics on what a lot of scientists, creation scientists that do research on whales have kind of come to, is that there are 5 created kinds of whales. All right, the first one would be the Archaeocetes, which are the old whales that aren't existing anymore, like Bacillus, Thorodon, that group, that were completely aquatic. The Mysticetes, which are the baleen whales. We talked about those. Sperm whales and pygmy whales. Pygmy sperm whales are a complete separate group. Sperm whales have teeth, but they only have teeth in the lower jaw and not in their upper jaw. In fact, their upper jaw has holes in it where the lower teeth go up into their jaw. Imagine that. It's kind of strange, right? They are the deepest divers on the planet. They can dive over 1.5 miles down to the bottom of the ocean, and they can hold their breath for over 1.5 hours. Think about what you would need in order to do that. The systems are unbelievable. And they're huge. They're like 60+ feet. And they eat giant squid. For you kids, 60-foot squid, pretty cool stuff, all right? So that's what they do. We have this group called the beaked whales, would be another created kind, and then finally all the other toothed whales, which would be your dolphins, your porpoise, that orca, belugas, narwhals. They would have all been a separate created kind, or holobarraman, if you want to use that terminology. Excuse me. So lastly, I'm going to leave you with this. Again, this is an evolutionary quote. This is from an evolutionist. he said, and this is to show how the world is falling apart under this whale evolution, because this is another evolutionist saying how this is not right. Evolutionary relationships among the major groups of cetaceans is more problematic since morphological and molecular analyses reach very different conclusions. So basically, when you look at their bodies and you look at their DNA, we get different information. What it said, indeed, based on conventional interpretations of the morphological and behavioral data, that's again what they look like, the echolocating toothed whales, about 67 species, and the filter-feeding baleen whales, about 10 species, are considered two distinct groups. Remember I told you the mysticetes and the odontocetes? That's what current science says. But when we look at more molecular data, so phylogenetic analysis of DNA and amino acid sequences, it contradicts this long taxonomic division. In fact, one group of toothed whales, the sperm whale, which I just explained to you, actually is more closely related morphologically to the baleen whales than to the toothed whales. So what has been the traditional thinking about whales has changed. I mean, just about every single quote I gave you, in fact, I can't think of a quote from a creationist I gave you. Every single one of them was from an evolutionary biologist. And if the evolutionary biologists are saying there's a problem here and a problem here and a problem here and a problem here and a problem here, guess what? There's a problem. Their theory is falling apart. And remember that video I showed you at the very beginning when Dr. T. Bison said, this is the best transitional stuff that we have going? Well, hopefully, in the last hour, I've kind of walked you through how it's really not the best. There's really nothing there for them to stand on based on the research that I've done and what bones are actually out there and what evolutionary biologists are discovering the digger they deep into this process. And that is it for now. So I know I know there's some time for some things, and then we'll have question time in just a minute. So, all right, I think I'm back on. Okay, here we go. Anybody have questions? Yes?
Yeah, so you said there's, according to creationists, 5 created kinds of theremin.
Yes.
And they were all there on day 5. Right?
They would have been there on day 5 with a wide range of genetic variability, so that over the time since then, they've had the ability to adapt to different environments, and that gives us the variety of things that we see in front of us.
You should still easily be able to find a humpback whale and a Bacillosaurus in the same strata, right? Would be expected.
If you humpback whales,
One of that was number 2.
yeah, would have adapted, depending on different periods. I mean, I don't remember when they said, if you go with evolutionary time, when they would have evolved. But again, Bacillosaurus were also known to be poor swimmers. So if you think of a global flood, sediment coming down, they would have had less ability to escape the moving and quickly moving waters. Humpbacks are much better swimmers than Bacillosaurus were, especially with the way.
So no humpbacks died between the...
I'm not saying they didn't die, they just did not fossilize, because as you know, fossilization is a very, very delicate process, and a very, very, very tiny percentage of the animals that have actually been in existence on this planet have actually fossilized. And we haven't found any.
Bacillosaurus was a poor swimmer. Were you there?
I was not, but I actually read 3 different sites, all based on evolutionists and their research, and they all said that Bacillosaurus was thought to swim in a snake-like, eel-like pattern and was a poor swimmer. So I'm just going by what science told me.
I actually spoke to Dr. Gingrich. That's not at all what he says. So, oops.
If you want to go to Wikipedia, PBS, and there were 3 other places that I went, and you can read exactly what I read. So we'll move on. Any other questions? Yes?
Did most of these animals live a long time ago, or are they just a bunch of made up things that people just thought?
They're not made up things, because if we have a fossil, that means that it lived. And we have evidence that it was there. It got fossilized. Most fossils, in my mind, were created during the flood when things were shifting, sediments were flowing, putting things, because you need, in order to have a fossil formed, you need rapid burial. you need water. And a global flood is the best example of how that would happen. So these animals did exist at one point. God would have created them, and they just didn't. Whether they went extinct during the flood or shortly after the flood, all we have left of them are the fossils that were left. So, yeah.
Would you have an opinion of the type of fish or whale that Jonah encountered?
You know, I've actually read a couple different thoughts. I do know that there are some species of shark that actually end up regurgitating stuff. So I read one article that said they thought it could be a very large shark because if they don't like what's in their stomach, they'll just cough it right back up later and get rid of it. So one thought I've read. Yeah.
Usually when I see an evolutionary timeline process, it's usually going from water to land. Why is this the opposite?
The question was, if you didn't hear it, when she looks at an evolutionary timeline, it usually goes from water to land. Why is this going the opposite direction? Well, the reason is if you go with evolutionary history, life started in the ocean, would have worked its way onto land. Later on, mammals evolved, and since whales are mammals, that means they would have had to evolve from land back into the water if you go through evolutionary history. Yes?
I have a question. You know the Bible says, as you was reading in Genesis, it said, God created these after its kind. You can't mix anything, like you can't put a dog and a cat and come up with anything. So why does evolutionists believe that we were created from the goo to the zoo to you? I can't understand that.
The question was why do evolutionists think that if God created kinds, why would evolutionists think that we started with goo and turned into everything? You know, that's one that, you know, other people might have different opinions, but in my mind, it's just we live in a sinful, fallen world, and when people don't have Christ, they try to make sense of the world around them without a God. And if you try to make sense of the world that we see around us with the diversity that we have, if you don't have God in the picture, I think the only conclusion you can really come to is an evolutionary conclusion that life had to start by itself and change into everything else. So, I mean, that's my personal opinion, but, I mean, the one thing I tell my kids and students that I talk about this kind of stuff is that when you go to talk about these things, you have to remember that this is a spiritual battle. I mean, we can argue all day on the facts and the bones and this and that, but, you know, I've argued with evolutionists for hours, and it doesn't really do any good. But what does good is when you pray and ask God to change hearts, because God changes. God can create change, not me. So just something to keep in mind as we talk through this stuff. Yeah?
How about the DNA? I mean, you talked about it here in the last picture, but on the DNA, have you studied that, or do they show graphs of the DNA differences, or what?
He asked about DNA and have I studied the differences in DNA in different whales. I briefly looked at, you know, that one quote I had that had a little bit of data on it, and what they basically pointed to is when they look at the DNA and they look at the amino acid sequences, that, you know, sperm whales are more closely related to the mysticetes, which was kind of surprising, versus, you know, the toothed whales, what they thought. And then they kind of clumped, you know, some of the smaller whales are more closely related. I mean, the fact that you can still take a pilot whale, which is I think they're 15 to 20 foot whale with teeth, and breed them with a bottlenose dolphin and get a wholphin, which has actually happened, that they are really closely related. And in my mind, those things wouldn't have evolved millions of years apart if they can still interbreed and actually make fertile offspring. So they're still hybridizing at, you know, when given the opportunity, which this happened at an enclosed aquarium where they had pilot whales swimming with bottlenose dolphins, and we got wholphins. So, yeah.
Would you like if you, since you said that sperm whales more closely related to the baleen whales, would you just have to mix a little bit of the toothed whales and the baleen whales, but more baleen whale and DNA in there to make a sperm whale, or would you make something, or would it be something different?
Okay, so I'm going to try and make sure I got this. So his question was baleen whale versus sperm whale. How much of the DNA is similar? How would you mix it up to get to that sperm whale from a baleen whale? Am I pretty close to what you were kind of asking?
I was asking kind of like if you, like a baleen whale, like, and a toothed whale, like
Oh, so the baleen whale and toothed whale, would you kind of mix those to get?
Yeah, but more baleen whale. Would you get more of the sperm whale, or would you get?
So basically the question is, if you take a toothed whale and a baleen whale and you kind of mix stuff together, could you get a sperm whale? Would you need more of the toothed whale or more of the baleen whale? You know, that's a good question for God. We can pray about that one and figure it out. If you go by creation and thought right now, the sperm whales are their own created kind, which means that God just created them as they are and gave them the ability to adapt. So we have sperm whales, we have pygmy sperm whales, and then he would have created the mysticetes separately and would have given them, again, the ability to adapt and change over time. They just have adapted into 10 or 11 different species, where sperm whales, there's 2 or 3. Toothed whales were able to adapt even more because they move 3 different areas. So I know it doesn't necessarily completely answer your question, but it's the best answer I can come up with, because I don't know how much DNA you would need of each one to mix to get to that thing. So, yeah.
I remember reading a while back or seeing on TV the largest, I believe it was a shark, but it could have been a whale, much larger than anything in the oceans today. You run across anything like that?
As far as I know, the biggest whale that on record is the blue whale, which is, I think, a full-grown male. The biggest one they measured is 110 feet, which is pretty big. I do know that there was once a megalodon, which is a large shark that would have looked like a great white, but would have been 60-ish feet long, is what they're theorizing. Pretty much what they have of those is just the teeth. So what they do is they take the teeth of that, compare them to a great white, and then they take the size, the ratio of size to a great white's jaw to a megalodon's jaw, and then they extrapolate from there how long it would be. So they think the megalodon would have been, roughly 60 feet. So it would have been a huge shark. And again, they went extinct just because food source, probably, as things died down. Yeah, in the purple.
Yeah, so as a teacher, sorry, I didn't catch whether you teach in a public school or a religious school, but how do you approach these ideas in a biology classroom, like creation and evolution?
Okay, so the question was, and I am a public school teacher, just so you know, as a public school teacher, how do I talk about the creation versus evolution thing? Within public school, I'm pretty constrained. I have to teach evolution, and I can't talk about creation. When I teach evolution, though, I teach it as a theory, not as fact. And I really try to get my kids thinking about, and I would do this if I taught creation too. I mean, with my kids, I really try to, my own personal children, I really try to make sure they can look at scientific information and be like, all right, here's the actual fact, here's the interpretation of it. So, I mean, for all these bones that we're talking about, there's a bone. We found it in this rock. I can prove that. From there, depending on my frame of reference and my worldview, I'm going to bring it into different directions of interpretation. So I kind of talk about that within my classroom when we do the evolution unit, and I talk about it throughout all units. I'm like, anytime you read something scientific, try to pull out, here's the actual fact, and then try to take from that, here's the interpretation or the bias or whatever you want to call it of that fact. So does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, I'm at the very top up there.
So with the whale shark, is that considered a whale because it has the back of a whale, but it has the top like fin of the shark?
Okay, he wants to know about whale sharks. Are they sharks or are they whales? Whale sharks are actually a fish. They're a full-fledged shark. They're called whale sharks, one, because they're really big, and two, they eat plankton just like a baleen whale would. So their fin, if you look at a whale shark, actually moves side to side just like a fish, because they are fully fish. They're just big and eat really tiny stuff. So, yeah. Yep, sharks have scales. Their scales are a little different than a regular fish. They're actually called dermal denticles. They're little teeth on their body, so they actually feel like sandpaper if you were to feel a shark. In fact, the whale sharks can actually cut you with their scales because they're razor sharp. So it just helps them with water hydrodynamics. So they're actually a fish. Yeah?
Yeah, the pod you mentioned that figured out how to kill white sharks.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot what the pod was, but did they eat the shark, or are they killing sharks because sharks are dangerous to other sea creatures?
The question was, with the pod of orcas that kills great whites, are they killing them just to kill them because they're dangerous, or to eat them? And they do it to eat them. That's a really good snack. I mean, you figure a male orca is 35 feet long. They're huge, compared to a male great white might be 22 to 25. So they actually figured out that if you take a shark and you flip them upside down, it puts them in kind of a paralyzed state. They're alive, but they can't swim. So what the shark will do is they'll come up really fast underneath it, they'll pop it upside down, and then another one from the pod will come in and take a bite out of the side and kill it, and then they all take turns eating parts of it, and they're done. So, and again, one whale figured this out, taught it to all the other ones, so there's just one pod that does this. And they have it on film. If you check it out on YouTube sometime, you can actually see it. And it's not a great video because it's from the water looking down, but you can kind of see it happening. So, yeah.
The sigmoid structure that you described on the ear.
Mm-hmm.
Is that necessarily a marine mammal feature? I mean, could it exist in a land mammal and have a function, and in a marine mammal and have a function, and so not necessarily require ancestry?
This was my first experience with the whole ear thing, so I was doing trying to figure all this stuff out. What I've kind of discovered, and I could do a lot more digging because there was tons of stuff on ears, was that a lot of mammals have that sigmoid process. It's just what it's shaped like, and the one on a whale is very finger-like, whereas the majority of land animals have a plate-like because it helps in the processing of the sound and the movement of the sound. And underwater, the finger-like one just works a little bit better than a more plate-like one. I mean, could there be animals that have, more finger-like on land or more plate-like underwater? Maybe from what I've heard and read, most land animals are more plate-like. The whales are more finger-like. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
What's the word you use to describe scriptural scientists who study the green kinds?
Baraminologists, baramins, which means created kinds. It's basically, if you think of evolution is an evolutionary tree. There was one starting organism, and it turned into this big branching tree. Baraminology is the study of baramins, which are created kinds, which looks more like an orchard, where you would have like the Mysticete line that spread out. You'd have the toothed whale line that kind of spread out. You'd have the beak whale created kind that spread out. You'd have your dogs that spread out. You'd have your cats that spread out. So that's what that means. Yeah?
And that's because of genetic variation, the variations in all genes, so that they were able to diversify, not meaning changing into anything else, but they already have the previous information to diversify into those different.
Yeah, and we can even use, we can use evolutionary talk. We can talk about natural selection. What natural selection does is takes a big amount of genetic information and it tweaks it and trims it down so that it fits specific ecosystems and environments. So when God created kinds, he would have created them with a wide range of variability. So when he created the dog kind, for example, when he created those, and on the ark he said, 2 of every kind of animal, so 2 dog kinds would have gone onto the ark. When they came off, they would have started to multiply and spread throughout the earth, and as they spread, they would have adapted through natural selection to different environments, and it narrowed their genetics a little bit, gave them slightly different looks, but we still have the ability, and this is one of the things that scientists that study this kind of look at, is can we still hybridize? If you look at horses, like horses, donkeys, ponies, zebras, that whole crew, they can all still hybridize. You can get a Zorse, you can get Zonies, you can get, pony or Hebras. There's tons of different stuff you can get. Camels and llamas still can breed. Camels live in Africa, llamas live in South America, but you can put a camel and a llama together and they can still hybridize and make commas. That's actually what they call them, there's a comma. So that's how they kind of test for created kinds is, can they still hybridize? And if they can, that's probably a created kind that we have within the environment around us. So, any other questions? I just want to give other people a chance. I know you probably have a lot of questions. Yeah?
Yeah, so one of your critiques for evolutionism was that there wasn't a united front, that there were a lot of disagreements. Are there disagreements within creationism, or points of arguments?
Yeah, and I think with any science there is. And I think my statement I was trying to make is that evolution is really good at putting a unified front up in there, like when you don't dig too deep. But when you start digging, there's a lot of difference. That quote that I brought up earlier from Ken Ham when I heard him say that evolution provides a unified front, the other half of that quote was that when someone that's trying to figure this all out looks at creationists, they're like, well, wow, these guys don't have it together, because there's young Earth creationists, there's old Earth creationists, there's theistic evolutionists, there's gap theory, there's this, there's that. And the way I kind of think about it is that what I've noticed is that creationists are very willing to talk about the fact that we don't know, that there are different ideas, and we try to really work together to figure it out. Whereas evolutionists, in my mind, it's a lot of propaganda trying to push this. So they take, even if they don't agree on stuff, they at least provide a unified front so that we can get people on board. And then, different scientists are researching different things, arguing. I mean, there's a huge argument on that Stephen Gould quote that I gave on gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium. I mean, there's a big clump of scientists, especially ones not in the United States, that don't think that gradualism can take place, small little changes over time, that evolutionary change has to happen in these big spurts. And Gould was a big person that promoted that. So, I mean, that's a huge thing, but that's not something you ever really hear about. So, I don't know, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You talked about the mutations that have to happen from land animals to whales.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the approximate mutation rate in anything organism?
I do know that, and this is a good segue. If you haven't read this book, I'm going to give you guys a plug right here. This one, The Scientific Approach to Evolution. I highly recommend reading it. It's a great way to just scientifically talk to someone that believes in evolution. Wonderfully written book. But one of the things he talks about in there is an experiment that's been running for decades on bacteria. They've taken bacteria and grow them in cultures, and they put them under high stressful situations to see what type of mutations take place. And in the, I think it's getting close to 40 years that they've been running this experiment, they've had the equivalent of, what is it? I think 3 or 4 million years worth of evolutionary change, but in a smaller scale because bacteria reproduce so quickly. And they've had 2 mutations that have stuck, and both of them were not good mutations. They were mutations of something breaking that helped them in this really stressful environment, but if you take them out of that environment, they die. So at that rate, if you use that actual scientific data, the amount of mutations that would need to take place in, even if you did have 8 to 10 million years to go from a Pakicetus to a whale, there's just not the time that you would need to have it happen. So does that kind of answer your question? Okay. I have anybody else? I have time for one short question here. Yeah?
Is mosaic a creation term and evolutionary term understood to mean the same thing, or is mosaic more the way we understand it?
A mosaic is, I mean, they just use that term the way we think of mosaic. A mosaic is a conglomeration of different things to make up one thing. Yeah, so it's the same idea. I mean, in biology, we have mosaics where there's, I mean, look at a duck-billed platypus. I mean, that's a mosaic if I've ever seen one. It's like got all these parts of different stuff. That's what a scientist would call a mosaic, just like a normal person would call a mosaic. So the terms are used pretty similarly. So, and I wish I had more time, but we are out of time. So thank you so much.